Good morning, students. We are talking about the turnout, a complete set of points and crossings provided for diverting the trains from a main track to a branch track is called turnouts. Trains ਦੇ main track ਤੋਂ branch track ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ divert ਹੋਣ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ turnout. The diversion of a train from the main track towards right of the main route in the facing direction, this turnout is known as right hand turnout. Right hand train ਦੇ divert ਹੋਣ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ right hand turnout. If a train from the main track is diverted to the left of the main route in the facing direction is called a left hand turnout. Turnout components: A. Stock rails. These stock rails along with their respective tongue rails from a pair of switches or points. The function of stock rail is to smooth working of tongue rails. A pair of tongue rails. The tongue rails along with stock rails from a pair of switches or points. The function of tongue rails is to the diversion of a train from the main track to a branch track. Four-lead rails. The function of these rails is to lead the track from heel of switches to the toe of crossing. A. V crossing. The function of V crossing is to provide gap between the rails to be crossed so that when flanks can pass through without any obstruction. Two check rails. The function of these rails is to check the tendency of wheels. Stretcher bar. The function of stretcher bar is to connect both the tongue rails together so that tongue rail move through the same distance while changing the points. Slide chairs. The function of slide chair is to support the tongue rails throughout their length and to allow their lateral movement for changing the points. A pair of heel blocks. The function of heel block is to keep the heel ends, both the tongue rails, at fixed distance. Switch tie plate. The plate is provided below the slide chairs to hold the track rigidly to the definite gauge at the toe of switches. Slipping of turnouts. The art of laying slippers at turnout is known as slipping of turnout. Two methods used for slipping of turnouts: by through slippers, by interplaced slippers. Why through slippers? This method, through slippers, under both the railway tracks, straight and curved. This method of slipping turnouts or points and crossing is the best. Through slippers have the advantages of maintaining both the tracks of the same level. They have no difficulty in packing off the blast during maintenance. This method of slipping should be preferred through slippers are easily available. Next, why interplaced slippers? This methods, these slippers are interplaced which lie partly under both the tracks. This method of slipping turnouts or points and crossings is not preferred. They have difficulty in packing off blast during maintenance. Points or switches. The combination of a tongue rail and the adjacent stock rail along with other necessary fittings is known as point or switches. Two types of switches are used on Indian Railways. Stub switches. In this type of switch, no separate tongue rail is provided and some portion of the track is moved from one side to the other side. This type of switch is not used in these days. It can be used for temporary works, for diverting the trains during maintenance or construction of a new railway track. Split switches. In this type of switch, a pair of tongue rail is combined with the stock rail. This type of switch providing more lateral rigidity to the turnouts. It can be used on tracks for the train running at high speed. Split switches is mostly used in these days. Crossings. The special form of construction done when two rails of different tracks cross each other at an angle as to provide flangeway clearance between the rails to be crossed is known as crossing. Requirements of ideal crossing. The assembly of a crossing should be rigid to withstand severe vibrations. Wing rails and nose of crossing should be consisting of special steel to resist heavy wear due to movement of wheels. The nose of crossing should have sufficient thickness to take all the stresses at the crossing. Component parts of a crossing. A crossing or V piece. A point rail. A splice rail. Two wing rail. Two check rail. Chairs provided in between toe and heel of the crossing. Distance blocks at throat, nose and heel of crossing. Types of crossing. Acute angle crossing. The crossing which is formed when right hand rail of one track crosses left hand rail of another track at an acute angle is called acute angle crossing or V crossing or frog crossing. This type of crossing mainly a point rail and a splice rail. Acute angle crossing is mostly used on Indian Railway. Next, obtuse angle crossing. The crossing which is formed when one track crosses another track at an obtuse angle is called obtuse angle crossing. This crossing is called diamond crossing due to the shape of its layout. This type of crossing consists mainly of acute angle and two obtuse angle crossings. Square crossing. The crossing which is formed when one track crosses another track of the same or different gauge at right angle is called square crossing. This type of crossing avoided on main lines. It causes heavy wear due to impact of moving wheel loads. Track junctions. The junctions which are formed by combination of points and crossings with curved and straight length of tracks to divert the trains from one track to another track are known as track junctions. Type of track junctions. Turnout. A complete set of points and crossing for diverting the trains from a main track to a branch track is called a turnout. Acute angle crossing. The arrangement made when right-hand rail of one track crosses left-hand rail of other track and at an acute angle is called acute angle crossing. Diamond crossing. The arrangement made when two tracks of different gauges cross each other at an obtuse angle is known as diamond crossing. Crossover. The arrangement made in the form of two sets of turnouts with or without a straight length between them which connect two parallel tracks for transferring a track from one track to the another is known as crossover. Scissor crossover. The combination of two crossovers overlapping each other provided between two adjacent parallel diverging tracks to enable the trains to change the track when approaching either direction is known as scissor crossover. This type of track junction consists of four pair of switches, four acute angle crossings, and a diamond crossings, jet rail, straight length, etc. Single slip. The arrangement provided in a diamond crossing to enable the trains to change the track when approaching from one direction only is called single slip. Double slip. The arrangement provided in a diamond crossing to enable the trains to change the track when approaching either direction is called a double slip. This type of track junction of to acute angle crossing to obtuse angle crossing, 4 special curved dead rails, 4 check rails, and 4 pair of switches, etc. 3-throw switch. The arrangement made to take off 2 turnouts from the same point of main track is called 3-throw switch. This type of track junction with similar flexure double turnout. The arrangement made to take off 2 turnouts from different points of a main track is known as double turnout. Gathering lines. The arrangement made when a number of parallel tracks are branched off from a common diagonal or inclined turnout track taken from a main track is called gathering lines or ladder track. Inspection of points and crossings. Gauge. Gauge should be checked throughout for a distance from a little in the front of the toe of switch to a short distance behind the heel of crossing. Tongue rails. These rails should have proper fixing with their respective stock rails and must have full bearing on the slide rails. Alignment of turnout curve. It should be checked by offsets from the straight track. Flangeway clearance. This should be checked at the toe and heel of switch between wing rails and the crossings and at check rails. Heel blocks. In the loose heel type switches, the front bolts should be sufficiently loose to permit the necessary lateral movement to the tongue rail, and the remaining bolts should be tight. Creep. Stock rail joints should be checked for creep, and these joints should not be out of square. Wear of wing rails near the throat and the brightness of the nose. Both of these should be checked, and welding may be done on the worn out parts. Slipper spacing and packing. These should be checked, and attention to the slippers placed at the heel of switches. Packing of slippers should be done for proper working of the turnout track. Tilting of rails. It should be checked and rectified. Bolts and fittings. These should be very tight with the exception of few heel bolts. Blast and drainage. There should always be sufficient quantity of good and clean blast for proper drainage of the tracks. Interlocking connections. All interlocking connections should be tight and clear of blast for their proper functioning.